and welcome to Literary Hype. I am Stephanie, your literary hype woman, and today's author conversation, brace yourselves, this is a good time. I normally film my intros right after I do the interview, but I had to take a break and let my face kind of calm down because I was so red from laughing so hard. My face still hurts. This is a hilarious interview. Laura Lee Gurhke, she wrote Bookshop Cinderella is her new book. She's been writing romance for more than 30 years now. And she's got some truths to share about this experience, and it is so awesome. And I just really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Laura Lee Gurhke about Bookshop Cinderella. Welcome to Literary Hype. It is a pleasure to have you on here to talk about your new book, Bookshop Cinderella, which is a lovely historical fiction. This is the first in a new series. If you want to set up what Bookshop Cinderella is and the world you're creating with it.
The whole thing surrounds the Savoy Hotel in London, and the Savoy was a very exceptional hotel for the time period. I write in the 1890s, and the Savoy was, at that time, was run by Cesar Ritz, who later went on to found the Ritz Hotel in Paris and the Ritz in London, et cetera, et cetera. And he was quite an extraordinary guy. And I ran across a story about him and found out that he actually was fired by the Savoy Hotel for embezzlement. And it was kept quite hush-hush at the time. And it was only uncovered when the Savoy archivists found the paperwork in the vault and went, what? And then it came out, and there's been books about it and articles about it and such. But the that event takes place in the second book, which I'm writing right now. But in the first book, it's just the luxury and the over the top extravagance of the Savoy. It was quite something. I mean, at one time, and I can't remember the date, they flooded the courtyard with water and put gondolas on it and had a party. I mean, that's the kind of thing they did, right? And so I thought, what a great setting for some romance novels. But it's difficult with a hotel because you have to have some kind of outside. You can't have the whole book take place in the hotel, right? Who wants that? So you got to figure out how to get them out and about. And so I decided that my first heroine was going to have a bookshop around the corner. So it's kind of like a combination. The book is kind of a combination of Cinderella and She's All That and the shop around the corner in a way. Although the plot isn't really the same, but she's got a little shop around the corner, and so it just worked. And you never know if an idea is going to work or not, right? You start toying with it, you're thinking, well, that's good, but then you get in the middle of it, and I'm finishing up the second book, and this is a book that has never felt like it works, like self-doubt every step. And so you never know, but the reviews have been good so far. So for Bookshop Cinderella, so we'll see.
Introduce us to our main character for this first book in the series and the shenanigans that await her.
Okay, well, the heroine's name is Evie, and she, like I said, she owns a bookshop, and it's one of those, it's not like a popular fiction bookshop. It's the kind of bookshop where you find rare first editions and, written in the original Latin, and her customers are mostly old professors. So she never meets anybody. She never goes anywhere. And she's a bit of a nerd. But she's from the middle class, and her cousin married up. And so she ended up going to finishing school, and she was absolutely a finishing school failure. And not a finishing school dropout, but close. She was not well received at finishing school. She was pretty much a disaster. And so she wants nothing to do with the aristocracy at all. She has no use for these people. She thinks they're all silly and self-important. And she's got some hurt from her childhood experiences. I mean, when you're a teenage girl, things like that can really, really bruise you for life. And so she's got her guard up with these people. Well, the hero is a duke, and he's the sort of guy who can't resist helping damsels in distress. It's just sort of a thing with him. And so his cousin, who is the heroine of book 2, asks him to do her a favor and go down to this bookshop and pick up some information from Evie, who does research for her on the side. So Max, our hero, is like, okay, sure. And he goes there and he's in the process of courting a woman who is the right sort of woman for him, right? He was married and he married out of his class and it didn't work. And she was miserable, hated England, hated the life, was absolutely completely unprepared to be a duchess. As much as he tried to help her, it was a failure. And anyway, she ends up, obviously, she dies later, but this is all before the book opens. But he's absolutely determined he's never going to marry out of his class because it just doesn't work out. Not because he's a snob, but because he just doesn't think it can work, right? So he's courting the perfect girl, and that's when they meet, and it goes from there. And he ends up his companions who are with him when he goes in the bookshop. They're not friends of his, and I won't go into why, but they're with him. And they are three young men who are drunk and obnoxious. And he's like, oh God, get me out of here with these guys. But he can't get rid of them. And they are making fun of her. And they're all gathered in the bar after they leave the heroine's bookshop. These men are all gathered in the bar, and these men are talking her down, and he can't stand it. And he stands up to defend her, and they're like, oh, please. She's absolutely the worst. And he's like, no. I think she could be a real beauty if she was just given a chance. And like, no, get out of here. So they all make a bet that he can turn her into the beauty of the ball, the belle of the ball. And so he goes back to propose this bet to her. And she, of course, is completely insulted by this. She's like, oh, what? I need a makeover? To hell with you. Get out of my shop. Right. But you know, so events happen, fate intervenes, and she ends up participating in this, and it goes on from there. But it is definitely a Cinderella story, for sure.
In this scene in the bookshop where these guys are being obnoxious, like, and they imply that he does not like to read, did it feel like a risk to you to present a hero in a book that might not like to read?
You know, he does read, but he doesn't, you know, because in the scene in the bookshop, the reader might think, and the heroine definitely thinks, that he doesn't like to read. But then as the book goes on, you find out that he actually does. He just doesn't like to shop. So he doesn't go to bookshops. And he tells her at one point, you know, if I want a book, I just order it. And she's like, why, ducal privilege? And he says, no, I just hate to shop. So, and he's got a huge library, and we see that later in the book. So it's not a matter of him not liking to read. Although I have had heroes that are not bookish. And I've had heroines who aren't bookish. It's just every character, every book is different, you know? But I do have to speak up in defense of Max. He does actually read.
Yes, it just, in that first scene, the implication is there, and I was like, that's a risk to have a hero who doesn't seem to like to read for a bookshop owner. But, you know, we learn things about Max along the way, and he's delightful because he's a duke, and, you know, you can't have an undelightful duke in a romance book. What fun is that?
Well, you can have the brooding, dark Beauty and the Beast type duke who has to really grovel at the end. You can do that. That's fun too.
Okay, fine. Fair point. Fair point.
The author just has to make him grovel big time. The bigger a jerky is, the more he has to grovel. That's my rule.
You hear of like girls making lists for their future husband, like what they want in their husband. But this time it's the guy that has what he's looking for in the wife and like lists it out. Was it fun for you to kind of flip that on its head?
Oh yeah, because the heroine is absolutely nothing like its list, right? So yeah, it's always fun. You know, I jokingly have always said, I mean, I sold my first book in 1992, so I've been at this a long time, and I joke that the number one thing that a heroine has to do is drive the hero crazy in all sorts of various ways.
I mean, she does stick her tongue out at him right away, so there's that.
Yeah, but he catches her, so.
The best, y'all. That scene is so much fun, especially because there is a second man in the picture, Rory. Yeah. Can I touch a little bit on Rory's troublemaking without spoiling too much?
A heroine who has a boyfriend is always tricky, because you don't want her to be in love with the boyfriend, but then why does she have the boyfriend if she's not in love with him? And if she is in love with him, why is she attracted to the hero? So it's a real tricky balance to achieve. And, you know, I'm not going to say how I did that, but I do think I did achieve that. Ultimately with that, she thinks he's something he isn't. She doesn't, and she's known him all her life. And so it's easier, I think, to excuse things and overlook things with someone you know, because you're like, well, that's just how he is, right? And the hero immediately understands what this guy is. He knows this guy's on the make right off the bat. And that angers him, right? He's angry on her behalf. Because again, this is a hero who loves to save damsels in distress, right? And he can see she's falling for an absolute rotter. And he's like, oh, this girl is so much better than him. What is she doing? So he's going to swoop in and save her, you know, from her idiotic mistake.
How much fun was it to get to play with Cinderella in kind of this different-esque time period?
You know, it's funny because I've never done, I mean, you know, a lot of times romance authors will talk about tropes, and there's Cinderella and Beauty and the Beast and all this. And I've never really done what I would call a truly straightforward Cinderella story. I mean, every romance is a Cinderella story in a way, but I've never done it quite this overtly, right? And it was a lot of fun, I have to say. You know, you try not to be too over the top. You don't want the reader to go, oh God, are we talking Disney or what? But, you know, because you have to have some maturity in your story. But it was a lot of fun to write. I truly enjoyed writing it. And I think their chemistry was really good. And that always makes it fun.
And the story does deal a lot with the whole love and duty debate that we see a lot in historical fiction. What kind of a challenge was that for you to use this tried and true trope in historical fiction, especially for this time period, but keep it fresh?
You know, keeping it fresh is always a challenge in romances, right? Because you have basic covenants you can't break. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back, and happy endings for all. And you have to work within that framework, and keeping it fresh within that, particularly when you're restrained by the fact that your publisher and your readers expect certain time periods from you. Like, readers would not be happy with me if I went off and wrote 1840s Wyoming, or, you know what I mean? I mean, that would be like, what? She's gone off the rails. This is not what I want from her. Where they might love it from somebody else, but from me, they expect, you know, late Victorian England. And I've carved out kind of a niche in that market. And so you've got reader expectations, you've got romance covenants. And so keeping it fresh is always a challenge. I think the important thing in any story is character, 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 character. And, you know, people ask me, well, you know, what about plot? And I'm like, plot schmott. I don't outline. I'm horrible at it. Every time I try, I feel so constricted. I feel claustrophobic and strangled and wedded to this outline that I've made. It's like, and I can't do it. So as long as I've been writing, I've figured out that my process is just start on page 1 and wing it. And I find that I create these characters and then they tell me what their story is, right? They operate a certain way, and I'll write something and I'll go, no, that's not true to her. It's wrong. And it doesn't work for the plot because it's not her, or it's not him, or it's not right for these people. So it's all about the characters, and they dictate how the story progresses. So I think if you do that, if you can always create characters who have a certain problem to solve, goals, dynamics, conflicts, if you can do that, the freshness comes in their unique perspective, because every person is different, right? So every character is going to be different. And as long as you can maintain and be true to that, I think every story can be fresh.
Do characters come to you fully formed, or is it something that you have to discover before you can really get into what their story should be?
Sometimes they come fully formed, and other times it takes forever to figure them out. Like the book I'm writing now, I'm almost to the end. Like it's due in about 10 days. And I would say within the last 2 to 3 weeks, genuinely figured out my hero. And of course, now in rewrite, I will have to go back and rework a bunch of stuff, because I'm just like, okay, now that I finally figured him out, took you long enough, I'll go back and fix it. But I would say that usually I know, if not right away, I know before I'm halfway, almost always, I've got him figured out. Other characters come fully formed right off the bat. When I was writing, I have a book called His Every Kiss, and the hero is a composer. And I got the idea because you never know where ideas are going to come from. I'm sitting in the tire store getting my tires changed, and the TV's on, and there's an interview on there. It was like on Entertainment Tonight, or I don't know what. This was a long time ago. And William Shatner, yeah, Captain Kirk, was on, and he was talking about how when he was on the Star Trek set, there was an explosion and he got tinnitus, and which is ringing in the ears, and it drove him so insane he actually thought about killing himself. And I thought, okay, there's a book in that for sure. And I wrote it down and I put it away and I didn't think about it. And then within a year or two, I pulled it out. I'm like, you know what? That needs to be a composer. He's a music composer. So I totally had the character right off the bat. I knew exactly what he was. I knew exactly what I wanted him to be. And so he was fully formed in my mind. When that happens, it's a blessing. It doesn't always, but usually I've got him figured out by halfway for sure.
What is it about historical romance that you love that keeps you writing books after so many?
I love history. I love romance. Every time I'd read anything in history, I'd be thinking, but where's the love story? Wait, what? Where's the love story? My favorite mystery writer of all time is Agatha Christie, because in a lot of her books, not all, but in almost all of her books, there is a romance somewhere in the story, right? And I love that. And I'm always looking for that in any historical book that I read. And I get frustrated if it isn't there. And I decided that I was gonna write historical romance. It just fits me. It suits me.
How has your research process changed over the years since you've done this so much? I'm sure you kind of are pretty well versed in what was going on. Do you ever have to go back and still do more research for these books?
Oh, for sure. The research is different though. When I started, there was a lot more broader research of the century, of the decade, of the overreaching, historical things that were going on. And over the years, because I've started to really know that, and I've honed in on a specific time period, the late 1800s, early 1900s, I pretty much know the overall history, and I know the social customs that were on at the time, and I know the costume, and I know the mannerisms, and I know who the players were on the world stage much more than I would have done 20 years ago. But I still have to do specific research to the book. Like in this series, a lot of research about the Savoy was necessary. And it's frustrating in a way because I can't go to London and look in the Savoy archives. So for me, it's guesswork, and then trying to find anything that can substantiate my guesswork. But I have a couple of really good books about the Savoy here that give me some seriously good detail. So, I'm just crossing my fingers that someone doesn't write to me and say, I happen to work for the Savoy and blah, blah, blah. I'll be like, I did write to the Savoy archivist several times, and she got back to me once, and then COVID hit, and evidently everyone was shut down and she was gone, and I never did. I tried several more times to get back to her, and I don't know what happened. So I wasn't able to verify some of the things I wanted to know. But I might have to do that when I get to revision on book 2. I might have to try to renew that contact, because there's just some things I need to know that I can't find, and I don't want to guess because they were actual historical fact. And when you're writing about an event, it's a bit challenging because you have to know, because you can't, some authors do it. Some authors will slough, particularly if they're further back in time. The further back in time you go, the more you can slough, right? You can slough off details in a medieval much more easily because we just really didn't know certain things. We just didn't know. But by the late Victorian era, there's a lot we knew. It's documented. There were people that were still alive, up to like 30 years ago. So it's a lot harder to get away with that. I can't imagine how contemporary writers do it. You'll see something on Amazon and a reader will say, this author didn't do their research. I happen to know blah, blah, blah. And then the author reads it and goes, no, you're actually wrong. I'm actually right. I did research that. And then there are times when they do catch you out in a mistake and you're like, oh no. That does happen too. And no, I won't say where it's happened to me. I'll let people figure that out.
Well, fine. So you've got at least 28 books that you've written on your website.
Right.
What do you know about writing now that you wish you would have known when you started?
Oh gosh, several things. First of all, if I was going to give advice to any writer starting out, I would say the first thing to do is accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to get bad reviews, and there are times when you're going to wish you had never started to do this. You'll love it, but you will also hate it. And the dips and valleys of this job are such that you just have to hold on and keep going. That's number one. Number two, be true to your own process. I can't tell you the number of writers who get up there and they give speeches and they tell you this is the way you do it. And it's as if there is no other way. And I remember, and I'm going to name a name here because he's big enough that he would never care if little old me said this, but Stephen King wrote a book about writing. And he said in this book about writing that if you didn't finish a draft of your book in 3 months, you weren't really a writer. Now I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he was saying. And it was somewhat condescending. And I, being a slow writer, I took umbrage to that. And I tossed that writing book out. And I thought, you know what? I am never and of course, as a slow writer, I used to beat myself up for this, right? I mean, when I was a newbie and they'd be like, well, you need to write faster. Editors were, for a long time, it's changed now, but for a long time, editors were all about faster, faster, more, more, more. And there was a lot of pressure on us and a lot of guilt if you didn't live up to expectations. And I, for the first 15 years I wrote, I had to work a day job too. I wasn't made of money. And so it really was hard to accept my own process and say, look, this is just the way I do it. I'm never going to be fast. I'm never going to be the fastest writer on the block. I'm never going to be the sexiest writer on the block. It's just not my wheelhouse. And I'm never going to live up to expectation X, because editors, and they don't mean to do this, it's not editors' fault. They've got pressures on them from above about, we've got to produce, and this is what the salespeople are telling us that readers want. And half the time, the salespeople, as wonderful as they are, sometimes they're talking out of their hat. They just want the easy sale, because they want your book in Target, they want your book in Walmart, and they don't always understand that just because you're doing what everybody else has done that's sold doesn't mean yours is going to sell. I can do everything that Julia Quinn does, and I will probably never have a Netflix show. There is no formula for this. Despite the fact that they want a formula, there is no formula for success, right? And so my advice to authors is be yourself. Be yourself, be yourself, be yourself. The trick is figuring out what that is, and that takes trial and error. But if you're feeling inauthentic, if you're feeling uncomfortable with it, then you've got to step back and say, is this how I work? Is this what I want to do? Is this the kind of writer I want to be? And that's a hard thing for a new author, to have that kind of faith and confidence in yourself. That takes practice. That takes error. That takes falling on your ass. It's one of those things you just have to learn to do. And I wish I could say to these authors, don't lose faith in yourself just because author X said you have to write a book in 3 months, or editor Y says if you're not writing 2 or 3 books a year, you're just never going to make it, or, don't shut out all that noise. Concentrate on your story and your process. I used to get told all the time that I needed to outline. If I would outline, I could write faster. No. Tried that, didn't work. Not doing that anymore. And I finally have just come to accept my process for what it is. I am who I am, and I make no apologies for that. And nor should any other writer.
What was the best advice that you got along the way that helped you figure out what kind of a writer you are?
Wow, I've gotten so much good advice on my career. That's hard. I would say that one of the best things that an author told me long time ago was, don't read your reviews. Particularly, this was right after Amazon started putting up reviews, and the advice was spot on, because you get someone who doesn't like your book, it's going to happen. You cannot take that personally. And the easiest way to avoid that is just don't go. Now, when the book first comes out, I will get on and I will read the initial reviews just to make sure there's no fantastic error, that occurred in the book that needs to be fixed, like right now. And but other than that, I don't read my reviews. I just don't, because there's nothing I can do about it. I can't respond, right? Because it's not my place. So I just have to sit back and take it. Well, I don't need that noise, because self-doubt is the enemy. Self-doubt is the enemy of the people. Do not do it. So you can't, it's okay to question yourself when you're feeling a little bit unsure. It's like, okay, am I right about this or am I wrong about this? But you can't agonize all day, right? You have to choose, you have to make a decision, you have to move forward. And if it's a mistake, oh well, you know what? It's gonna happen. And you have to forgive yourself for those things. So it's much easier to shut out the noise if you don't read reviews. And that's not a slap on reviewers. They have every right to feel any way about a book they want. I just can't handle it when they hate it. It's a disappointment. I feel like I've disappointed them, right? Like, oh my God, I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And I can't beat myself up like that. It's too hard on me. It's too hard on any author. So I would say that's some of the best advice I ever got. It gave me some peace of mind that I had not had up to that point.
And since you mentioned Julia Quinn, you do have a little blurb on the front of this book from her. What's it like to get a blurb and support from an author who's having such a moment in the cultural zeitgeist right now?
It's funny because Julie and I have been friends for years. So I've known her, we had the same agent for quite a while. And I've known Julie for, I would say, 20 years. So I knew her when, right? I knew her long before. I knew her, she had just hit she was in the middle of the Lady Whistledowns when we met, or I think Viscount Love Me, actually, that's the second book or third, whichever Bridgerton book that was. Real early on in the Bridgertons is when I first met her. When I first came to Avon, which was in 2002. So, oh God, I'm getting old. But so I've known Julie for a long, long time. I'm tickled to death for her. I'm so happy for her. But we've been friends for years. We haven't been in touch much lately because I'm not with Avon anymore. So it's a lot harder to make that effort to stay in touch when you're not at the same publisher. But she's terrific. She's every bit as nice as she seems, and not the least bit pretentious, and very kind and very generous to other authors. She's terrific. Love her.
In looking you up and researching you, saw that you used to be a construction manager.
Yeah.
Before you made it to be a full-time writer. What did you learn from that job that has helped you as a writer?
Actually, more than you might think. For one thing, construction is a male-dominated business. And true story, I'll digress a little bit if we have time, because this story is hilariously funny and romance readers will appreciate it. So our construction company, my mom ran the office and my dad ran the construction. And there were two women in the office besides me and my mom. There was a receptionist, and there was a bookkeeping assistant who helped me with the bookkeeping and such. And but my mom ran the show, and our receptionist had a men of construction wall calendar, which was every bit as hot as you would think it was, hanging up. And Mr. September was, oh my God, and he's hanging up on the wall. And so this subcontractor comes in to give us a bid, and he wasn't Mr. September, but he was fairly young, but he was not Mr. September, but he wasn't ugly, but he was just ordinary. He was walking in his construction boots and his, sweaty t-shirt, and he walked in his tool belt, and he walks in, he sees Mr. September, and he looks around, he sees me on the phone, my mom on the phone, the receptionist sitting there, and our bookkeeper in the back, and he says, "Is this an all-woman construction company?" Chris, our receptionist, without blinking an eye, said, "You got a problem with that?" And he said, "No, not at all." She's like, "Just kidding." But to say what I've learned about writing romance from construction is that there's a lot of conversation now, and there should be, about what is offensive and what isn't. But having been around men in a male-dominated business and learned how to hold my own in said business, I learned a lot about men and how men think. Men do not think like women. They just don't. This is just a fact. And I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make as romance writers, if we want to be true to life, we have to accept that characters are unique, and men and women are different. We're not the same. We don't think the same. And I learned a lot about how to create characters who are likable and also real, and still operate within the framework of how men and women think. And sometimes in this age of sensitivity readers and that sort of thing, it can sometimes be a little difficult. I mean, and I'm older. I cut my teeth in romance a long time ago when rape in romance was still acceptable. I never understood it, but there was a lot of it in the early days. And so I'm somewhat old-fashioned. And so when a sensitivity reader says to me that I have to change this because this might be offensive to readers, I'm like, but a man in 1890 would not have thought the way you want me to make him think. It would have been completely foreign to him. Not because he's a jerk, but just because he is the man who he is, right? So there's always this balancing act we have to do between reality and fantasy, and the way men really think versus, I mean, my husband has jokingly said to me that if women really knew how men think, you'd all become nuns. And, there is a certain amount of that is, I mean, he's kidding, but there's a little bit of truth in that joke, right? And so I think that it's important to write authentic people. And being in a construction company helped me figure out men, honestly. It did.
Who knew that was not what I was expecting. I was expecting like time management or something like.
Oh no, I'm the worst time manager on the planet. I mean, I'm always late, and I'm also always late with my books. My editors really don't like it at all. I like to say that lateness is greatness. But I'm late to parties. My husband has to drag me out the door. We're going to be late. I'm like, it's a party. No one shows up on time at a party. It's like, I do. Come on, we're going. So, so I'm always late, but yeah, no, time management, management, whatever. It gets done when it gets done. My editor is probably watching this going, oh my God.
It's fine. Everything is fine.
Everything is fine.
We'll get the book eventually.
Exactly.
And since you are
out, what do you care? You have plenty of time to put it together. What's your problem? Oh, I shouldn't say that. My editor's going to kill me now.
I mean, honesty.
Oh, well, yeah.
You are who you are. That's what you said. So
That's it. I am who I am.
I
My
mean, at
editor's
this
like,
point,
"Just
if they
be
don't know
you a
what
little
you like.
faster. Just be you a little faster." Oh well.
So you mentioned that you are drafting the second book in this series. Is this going to continue with a Disney princess vibes like Cinderella did on the
The
first?
title, the tentative title for book 2 is Lady Scandal. And the heroine is Delia, who you met if you read the first part of Bookshop Cinderella. You've met her. She's Max's cousin. She's the hero of Bookshop Cinderella's cousin. Her book is the second book, and she is a completely different person, as you know, from Evie, and her experience is also different. She's a 3-time widow. Her husbands die. This is what they do. And, she's decided she's never going to marry again. Been there, done that 3 times, have no desire to do it again. She is now a career woman, and she's carved out a place for herself. She's not a scandal in the sense of her reputation is ruined, and she's too highly positioned for that. Her cousin's a duke. She's wealthy. She's made 3 marriages. She's a countess. So, people accept her for who she is to a great extent. She has her friends, but she has her enemies too, as we will see in the story. But she is a little bit of a scandal in the sense that she just doesn't care what people think. She does what she does. And, she wants what she wants. She's a bit manipulative. She's, the hero calls her out on this, and she's like, "Well, what's wrong with putting on a pretty dress if you want to catch a man's attention? Of course I'm going to wear perfume if I want to ask you for a favor. Why are you mad about that?" Right? She doesn't see there's anything wrong with this, right? Low neckline. Yeah. Okay. About that project that I want to do, and she doesn't see there's anything wrong with this. And the hero's like, so she's a totally different person from Evie. She's very sexually confident, but she's also vulnerable because she's scared, because she thinks she's a jinx, right? I mean, she's had 3 husbands die on her. So she's a little bit, they take bets as to who, when her next husband's going to die, So, at White's, they lay bets on these things. So she's a little bit, skittish about getting married. And our hero, of course, is the straight-laced, upright, moral, honorable guy who would never consider, free love. Marriage is the only way. And so, and he comes in, and he's got some power over her and over her job, and at the hotel, and so she resents him for this, and that's how their story starts out. And she's very strong-willed, and so is he, and goes from there.
How many books are you planning for this series?
3. There's 3. In the second book, which I'm just finishing, you'll meet the hero and heroine for book 3, and you'll get a little bit of an idea of what their story is about. Although even for me, it's very vague because I don't outline. So until I get into their story, I won't have details. But they're a sort of, that story is a man from the past sort of story. This is the Merry Widow. The next one is the Man from the Past. What that title is going to be, I have no clue, no idea. I'm not even sure that Lady Scandal is the title of this one. That's the title we're going with right now. That's the title my editor suggested, and sales likes it, so I assume that's going to be the title.
Adventures ahead.
You never know what they're going to like and what they're not going to like. I come up with a title I think is great, and then my editor goes, eh. And then she'll give me a title, and I'll think, really? Titles are an odd thing. And then when you find the right one, though, it's like, yes, okay. So, and there are some titles that I get that I just will never like. Because you can't, I remember on, which book of mine was it? One of my books, my editor at Avon, when I was at Avon, my editor and I went through, I think, 80 title ideas before we found one. Seriously, it was like, we were calling other authors and going, okay, here's the plot. Give me a title. We need a title. We were calling all our author friends, going, Julie Quinn, I need a title. And it was crazy. It was crazy.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I hope people like the book. I liked writing it. I never know how a book is going to be received, but I really hope people like it. And anybody that wants to ask me questions, feel free to email me at my website, lauraleegurhke.com. And you can find out everything about my books there. But if there's anything people want to know, I love hearing from readers. So I always encourage them to write to me if they have questions. Or want to give me feedback. Just try to be nice to me. I'm insecure. I have contests on my website. I do book giveaways. I have a newsletter, and when people subscribe to my newsletter, I do secret contests that are only for people that are already subscribers. So sometimes when you get the newsletter and you open it up, there's, if you're one of the first 5 people to answer this newsletter, you can get a free book or whatever. So it's kind of fun. So, and it's spam free. So, so I like to get people to subscribe to my newsletter so they can find out what's going on with my books. And one thing I do want to tell everyone who is a fan of mine who might be watching this, I will eventually write a story for Pongo. They'll know what that means. My American Heiress books, there's 4 books, but there were 5 heroes. And one of my heroes, James, whose nickname is Pongo, and no one remembers why. Even I don't know why. I'll have to make something up. But Pongo will eventually get a story someday, hopefully, if I live that long. We'll have to see, but I'm going to try. So for any readers that want to know, I'm going to try to write a story for Pongo. That's all I got.
Is that a scoop? I feel like it's a scoop.
It's a scoop. When that's going to be, I have no idea. Honestly, I have to finish this series, and then I'm probably going to write another series for of 3, and then after that, hopefully, I'll get to Pongo. We'll see.
So in like 5 years.
Yeah, the way I write. Yeah. Sorry, everyone.
A book a year isn't unheard of. That's like the kind of normal speed that's expected at this point.
It used to be the norm. When I started out, a book a year was the norm. No one expected you to write faster than that. And then it was 2 books a year, and then it was 3. And then there were these authors. Looking at you, Nora Roberts, who set this bar so impossibly high. And it was like, damn you, Nora, stop it.
You got to give us time to read them all.
Exactly.
And so the last question we ask everyone, because this is Literary Hype, what books are you hyped about right now?
I'm in deadline, so I have no idea what's out. I've been reading a lot of historical fiction lately, and what's the one that I just bought? I haven't read yet. It's like a 3-stranded storyline about a garden, and the contemporary one, she's a landscape architect, and anyway. I will put a pitch out there because I always do, because this is, in my opinion, one of the greatest books I've ever read. And I say this every time I do an interview, I have to say it again. A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. Oh my God, one of the best books I've ever read. Fantastic. So I always give a pitch for that. I just reread it a few months ago, and it's every bit as good the second time. I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. What books am I hyped about? It's really hard because I'm not reading right now, because I don't read when I'm writing. I read in between books, but I don't read while I'm writing a book, because if it's good, it depresses me. If it's bad, it makes me angry. And either way, those are not emotions that I need to be channeling. So I don't read romance. In fact, I don't read at all, really. I watch TV because I like visual stimulation, because you're looking at a computer screen all day. You're dealing with words, right? And so I really don't read very much when I'm writing. So that's a hard question for me. Ask me in a couple months and I'll have a bunch of books, because I've got a to be read pile in my Kindle, but I can never remember what's in it until I go back and look and I go, oh yeah, I bought that like a year ago. Okay, I think I'm going to read that one. So I'll let you know. If you want to ask me that question again in a couple months, I can tell you.
Book reading and book buying are very different hobbies. So I understand.
Oh yes, it's a good thing. It's a good thing my Kindle is my to be read now, because if my to be read pile was in my library over here, it'd be this tall. It'd be over my head. I swear. Yeah, exactly. See, you
I have a
know,
whole wall. It's fine.
the struggle is real. It's real.
100% real.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking time while you're on deadline to talk about this book. And it's so much fun. I hope people enjoy it and just appreciate the jewel that it is.
I hope so too. And thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Laura for taking time to talk to me while on deadline. She is 10 days away from deadline from her second book, and she is taking time to do interviews. I appreciate it so much, because that's a very stressful time for an author, and to take the time to crack some jokes and talk about a book, I appreciate it so, so much. And I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. It did my heart a lot of good to see someone being so authentic to themselves. And just like, this is who I am and this is who I'm going to be. I love it so, so much, and I hope you did too. So you can check out Bookshop Cinderella for yourself. There are links to buy this down below, as well as links to find Laura on social media and her website that she talked about, which has a lot of goodies that you're going to want to check out. And while you're outside of the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really does help things out. And you know, there's a little bell there so you can turn on notifications and find out when I'm posting my next video. You don't want to miss out on all the shenanigans coming up. So stick around. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time.